Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Apaa A History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bamukunda, for coming on to the podcast. And before we start, I'll just have you introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure being on this podcast. I'm Hillary Bamukunda. I'm a passionate educator, a teacher. I'm a versatile poet. I'm also a writer. Currently, I'm the president of UNEOTA, Uganda National English Language Teachers Association. I also dub as the chairperson of Kibas Youth Development Association. This is a youth group tailored towards cultural entrepreneurship. And I'm the founding president of the Resilient Futures Foundation Uganda.
Oh, thank you so much. And, you know, we'll start now because we're talking about Proverbs and the role that, you know, in terms of that you wrote about. So can you just share a little bit of a background as to what drew you to discuss this topic about African proverbs?
Thank you. I think my paper that brings me here was the paper I did about the research on the how African proverbs or the thematic significance of proverbs towards child upbringing in our African society, how these proverbs help us in bring out our children with norms, discipline, ABCD in our continent or in our societies.
Now, proverbs are really, you know, they're deeply rooted in cultural traditions. And so how do proverbs function as a reflection of the values, beliefs, and cultural identity within African societies, as highlighted in your paper?
That's very much true. Proverbs portray our languages and they are depicted in our, I would call them, I don't want to say vernacular, but I would say the local language. That's our cultural identity. A case in point is where I am in Uganda. Uganda has around 41 living languages, but altogether there are around 51 distinct languages, with these 11 belonging to the minority groups. Now, in African tradition, of course, the proverbs are used for different purposes. That is, they're used in, as far as marriage is concerned, child upbringing, peace, unity, respect, religion, and all these relate to the beliefs of a given community. For instance, in my community, a proverb, for instance, I will speak local language, hope you're fine with it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so if someone says akatiki kwa kachiri kabisi or something like, of course, that would translate like you bend the tree when it is still young, that when it is old, when you bend it, it will break. Now, something similar to if you're upbringing a child, it's better to impart in the values you want in this child while the child is still young. Similar to the English proverb of spare the rod and spoil the child, where in Uganda they would say sulo omwana, sulo omugo, or yonono omwana, relating also to the charity begins at home. So these proverbs relate to different cultural ceremonies and rituals. They even relate to our names, especially like for me, where I come from, the name would be depicted from an event, from a happening. Unlike some African societies where names are depicted from their clans and totems, so it's easier to tell where someone comes or which clan someone comes from the name. But back to these proverbs, that they are really deeply rooted in our cultural traditions, and they have huge reflection of our values, of our beliefs, and our cultural identity as Africans.
Well, thank you. That's really great. And, proverbs are also seen as, a form of wisdom. And how do African proverbs contribute to the preservation and transmission of wisdom and knowledge across the generation?
So preservation of course, we normally look at proverbs as forms of wisdom. Like the English, those who attempt to define proverbs will say they are wise sayings. So that means if you're not wise, you will not understand the saying. However, these proverbs in Africa have very much contributed to preservation and transmission of this wisdom and knowledge across different generations. And this has been maintained from our language, and mostly because with all the modifications we are trying to bring, for instance, the African cinema or African film, of course, with across generations, that has also improved. And mostly for the Afri-cinema that has been in our local languages, we have tried to maintain these proverbs, and somehow they have helped us to maintain, to preserve, maintain our language and preserve our wisdom and knowledge. We have various African proverbs in documentaries, the novels for authors who have been writing novels and short plays, the skits, all these, especially those who have tried to write in local language, even those who have tried to write in foreign languages, but somehow have maintained the African literature, trying to tell the story of Africans. Somehow these proverbs have managed to get their way into their books, and in that we have transmitted the wisdom and knowledge across all these generations, because once they are in audiovisual, you're very sure that over the years we shall have all these proverbs now and then. More so for people in the Caribbean, people in Europe and other continents who try to learn African languages. Some have learned our proverbs through the books they are reading and movies they watch that are shot and made in Africa. So partly that is language acquisition. It has come with our preservation of this wisdom and knowledge across generations in print and in media.
Yeah, that's quite that's quite interesting that it would, through media, through print, that is still transmitting and still continuing. So with languages and dialects across Africa, could you discuss how proverbs are adopted or varied within the different African languages while still retaining their cultural and moral essence?
Actually, that's very quite fascinating. Like I said earlier, that Uganda, for instance, we have around 41 living languages. But of course, the languages that are spoken would be around 51. Now, this is a country of around 45 million people. And with all those dialects, you would wonder how these proverbs are adopted and varied within different African languages, while we retain our cultural identity and moral essence. Because, for instance, if we have, for instance, different tribes, different people speaking different languages, and that means different languages have their own proverbs, however much they are related. Now, transliteration, I would call it direct translation, has helped us in a way that as these proverbs are adopted across the different African languages, transliteration helps us to retain the culture and the moral essence. For instance, in African narration or orature, the oral literature part of it, whereby you want to tell your story your own way from your own cultural identity. Now, you will have I don't know how you do it that side, but here, if someone is speaking, someone will say, the Caribbean say, I don't know your local language. I don't know if it's one language. The English say, the Baganda say, the Banyankole say. Now, of course, after that, then it is followed by the transliteration. For instance, I would say, the Banyankole say, akati kwa kachiri kabisi, literally meaning that you bend the tree while it is still young. Now, even when I'm speaking to a different dialect, I try, another person will try to tell me the same thing in his or her own language. And by that, I'm retaining my cultural identity and sense. But however, these proverbs are being adopted and we are learning across the different African languages. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into the fact that you're just, it's being integrated, right? So,
Yeah.
and it kind of goes into the next question with Proverbs used as a tool for communication and social interaction. So, and like, how do African societies use Proverbs in everyday conversations and interactions as discussed in the paper?
Now, like I had cited in my paper, that universally man was blessed with a variety of occasions that are required, that required singing, reciting, or chanting. This especially so with the events when man celebrated the rites of passages. I think that was cited by Finnegan 2007, who further observes that the various crucial points of human life also provide contexts for festivity, that's the artistic performance. And he cited occasions like initiations, weddings, funerals, and of course, hunting. We have very many. And he goes ahead to say that the fabric of human life is interwoven with music and song. Now, over time, over years, we have, of course, we no longer sit around the fireplace to listen to our grandfathers and grandmothers tell us stories of once upon a time, there lived a man, ABCD, such that we can learn from their wisdom now. But we still have these proverbs with us now. The question would be, how have these proverbs been a tool of communication and social interaction? Now, we have interwoven these proverbs into songs, into areas where we can perform. And in this performance, we can get to learn these proverbs. And of course, through dialogue, and of course, the weddings bring in the social interaction, the speeches, and of course, basically, I think that's what I discussed in my paper. Yeah, that with all these happenings and events in African traditional society, we are meant to sip and eat on the wisdom of the proverbs from the songs, from the oral performances.
Okay, not a problem. So those two examples that would be used. So, and then of course, your paper talked about in terms of the educational aspect of Proverbs. So again, with Proverbs being used as a teaching tool to teach morals and ethics and life skills to a younger generation in African societies, can you just give an example on that and speak to that for a bit?
Yeah, perfect. Actually, one of my biggest ideas in doing this research was that I looked at the curriculum aspect to begin with, because Proverbs as an aspect of orature or oral literature is an element that exists in every African society. There is no African society without oral literature. And thus it serves as a teaching and learning aid for everyone that is studying any language, basically, whether it's oral, whether it's local language or foreign languages, because all these languages have they have their oral literature. And for that, Proverbs aid other resources, and they themselves become resources in learning and teaching environment. more so, they are used in relation to other topics, to teach language. And of course, when it comes to the younger generation in Africa, Proverbs has been foundational in teaching life skills, ethics, and moral lessons. This is because that our African proverbs are rich in all spheres and dimensions of life, in that they tackle every thematic concern. They are proverbs that are that have a specialty in equipping the young generation with discipline, with growing up, with respect, how to respect people, with work. You should be intentional towards work. For instance, in my language, we say atakora taria, and the Baganda would say atakori taring. And of course, with the other biblical allusion of Paul, that of course, in order to eat, you have to work. Now, with all proverbs tailored towards all the themes that are quite helpful to learn and get the long life skills, moral and discipline skills. I think that is partially the education aspect of the proverbs, in that it has kind of a co-curricular, but it has helped in cementing its place in the curriculum of teaching language and helping the young generation acquire the moral lessons, ethics, and life skills for their betterment of their life towards the socio-economic transformation of our society, and remaining rooted to our African norms, culture, and beliefs.
No, thank you. And you know, it still goes into, I guess, with Proverbs being oral, it's an oral tradition, and it's still a, you know, it's a vital aspect of African culture. How do Proverbs contribute to the richness of this oral literature and storytelling in African societies, and how have they evolved over time?
I can say that yes, oral tradition or orature is a vital aspect of African culture, and somehow we can all agree that Proverbs have contributed to the richness of oral literature and narration, storytelling in African societies. However, we shall still agree to the same magnitude that this has evolved over time, in that we, most of the ceremonies that we had, if it was weekly, now it's monthly or yearly. So it means there is a reduction of time in meeting for the narration. So, but we cannot take away the fact that these proverbs are still contributing. These proverbs have acted as a bridge in storytelling, that is to connect the dots together, just like in novels. I would say we would not have written literature without oral literature. The yearning and the love of remaining with what we love dearly, that is all literature, pushed most of us who are into writing novels, poetry, and everything to write everything down, such that when people can no longer speak, we can have our eyes to read. So partially the evolving has been in the number of written copies. I think there has been an increase of written literature year in, year out. The numbers continue soaring, which shows a movement towards from the oral to the written, and the proverbs cannot be taken out of question, because these proverbs have helped all the authors, the playwrights in writing novels, the narrative compositions. They have helped in creating scenarios in terms of answering the narrative. Someone begins with a proverb, and then maybe one man's meat is another man's poison. I looked at now someone starts from there to build a kind of a narrative or a story that is important to what he or she wants to deliver. So I can say that the evolving has been there, and of course with a modern movement of Afri-cinema, written literature in Africa, the proverbs have been key and continue being key in the times to come.
Definitely. And I know that you kind of touched on this, but can you just share some insights of how our proverbs are used in various contexts, such as within ceremonies or rituals or traditional gatherings within African communities, as you mentioned in the book?
Yeah, perfect. We have very many ceremonies, rituals, and traditional gatherings in African communities. And these ceremonies, rituals, and traditional gatherings vary from one traditional society and community to another. I would take an example of my own community.
Yeah.
I would say I come from the traditional Ankole kingdom in Western Uganda. Proverbs are mostly like it will be very difficult for you to listen to the traditional Ankole songs without hearing 1, 2, or 3 proverbs in the songs. So they are intertwined in our traditional songs. These proverbs are intertwined in our oral speeches, while at the traditional ceremonies, the rituals, and the gatherings, call it the family meetings. Then we have oral poetry. People are reciting poems. You automatically hear proverbs, the traditional proverbs there and then. And we have the incantations. So you're likely to see these proverbs being intertwined. I would take an example of, for instance, in Ankole, they have a song they sing during a wedding ceremony, and they are saying, "Wizira agenda omwana kwakura shwerwa," something like when nyamunyo kwekureribwa omwana kwakura shwerwa, so that when of course the banana gets ripe, then it must be eaten. Something like when the girl grows up to a marriageable age, then she should get married. Why not? I would even relate it to Walt Soyinka's The Lion and the Jewel. In that play, at the end, as Sidi is getting married to Baroka, while Lakunle is busy chasing the wind, there is that song that is connected. You can see the intertwining of the song into the storyline. I think the song is Torani, something. I don't know what it means in the Nigerian, but you can see, even in the I Would Marry When I Want by Ngugi Wathiogo and Ngugi, you look at the intertwining of these songs into the narrative. And most of these songs and most of these proverbs are intertwined in to bring out a message in our rituals, in our ceremonies, and traditional gatherings. Even the statement, "I will marry when I want," is more proverbial. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no problem. And then, of course, Proverbs always, poses a metaphoric and a symbolic meaning. How did you mention in your article to explain the significance of these metaphors in conveying a deeper cultural and societal message within African proverbs?
Yeah, oftentimes people normally take a challenge while defining what a proverb is. And in most cases, people tend to simplify it, and they say a proverb is a wise saying. And now, that is where this question comes in, that if we are looking at these proverbs often having that huge sense of metaphor or being metaphoric and symbolic in nature, in my article and paper, I was looking at how these metaphors convey the deeper culture and society messages. And I was basically looking about, referring to the Ankole or the Banyankole. And like I've said previously, I would take an instance of a proverb in Runyankore, that enyamonyo kwekura eriwa, literally meaning still in the same language, that omuchikwakura ashwerwa, that when the banana is ripe, then you eat it. When the girl is old, she gets married. Now that was the African tradition. But instead of people saying that when the girl is married, when the girl is old, she gets married, they are saying when the banana is ripe, you eat it. So you won't find people around trying to speak some things the way they are. And I would give another instance, that maybe another proverb, that embeba ento nyekutwara enkuru aha mweziga, literally meaning that the young rat, the older rat will take the young rats to where there is food. And this was in relation to the young adults, that the firstborn or the older people should be able to direct the young which steps or which direction to take. Now, in my research paper, I was looking at partly the significance of these metaphoric and symbolic meanings of these African proverbs were largely centered on euphemism, in that there are some words that our elders thought it would not be better to just speak them the way they are. So they were cautioned and put into a wrap together and given to us for our own literary consumption.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. And, you know, as with the African diaspora is scattered across the globe, how do African proverbs maintain their relevance and influence across the different diasporic communities, and what impact do they have on maintaining their connections to African heritage and identity?
So most of the African proverbs have their equivalent in another local language, and this creates unity in diversity, save for a few attached to some ceremonies and rituals. I haven't been to many African countries, but I would tell that our origin, our migration stories, our history shows that we were partly one, and most of our languages have relationship with the other. So even with the African proverbs, there is always an equivalent of another in another language, even with foreign languages. And this has kept the Africans in the diaspora a bit united together, in that some of their languages, they are not the same, but they kind of have that relationship, with even some words being the same with the same meaning. Like I had said, that even here in Uganda, you would find a proverb, for instance, in Runyankore, ebyohingo inenda nibyo sharuro ziri. And literally in English, someone would say, you reap what you sow. But in Runyankore, it would mean that what you plant when you're pregnant is what you harvest when you give birth. Now it's the same as you reap what you sow. The Baganda would say, chosiga chokungura. The same, you reap what you sow. And of course, worth noting are the events in which these proverbs were used back in Africa. The hunting, working, babysitting, playing, farewell, journeys, travels, and all of these prompted oral performance. Now, from the oral performance of oral literature is where the Africans in diaspora that are scattered around the globe have tried to use the African proverbs and maintain the relevance and influence, in that we have African fests, Afro festivals, musical festivals bringing Africans together, and even the musicians that are headlining most of these festivals in the diaspora are from Africa. And it would not stop someone from Morocco attending an Afro festival where a South African musician is performing. Because, and with the performance, the oral performance of songs and plays and other skits, that we have tried to remain with a connection. And as I conclude on this, we also have, of course, the novels, the people who have written African literature. These novels have moved widely. You will find that the majority of the Africans in the diaspora have read the likes of things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, Darkness at Noon. So the African literature keeps us together. And in all these books, the African proverbs are something to reckon with. So they keep us together.
Definitely
And
so.
thus maintaining the connection to our African heritage and identity.
Perfect. And then, as we close this discussion, is what would you like to leave the audience in regards to Proverbs that you may have not have mentioned during our discussion?
I would say that our culture is our identity. It's our heritage. Our culture shows our values, our beliefs, and we cannot do away with our tradition because of the modern trends and whatever is happening everywhere in the world. However much we cannot stop it. But remember that anyone who does not know where they are coming from will definitely not know where they are going. Like the Banyankore would normally say that over sijire atavandinzire. That's a proverb to mean that the person who almost people have left him would be like, no, they are waiting for me. So the traditions that are eroding our African culture, that is taking us away from our norms, from sticking to our African literature, growing with our proverbs and other literature, they are staying firm in their traditions, in their beliefs, in their values. So it's high time to hold our culture, heritage flag high, and we become proud of our culture, our heritage, our identity. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And maybe as parting shots, this November, I think we shall be launching a docu-series connected to this called Tuko Pamoja docu-series, meaning we are one. That all tribes are one and all Africans, we belong to one heritage and one identity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll make sure that if you provide me the details, I'll put it in the show notes as well as your article that people can be able to read that. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was nice.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.